Welcome to this Union Talk recap episode. At the AFT, we believe in the power and necessity of public schools. In today's recap episode, you will hear an excerpt from a compelling conversation between Randi Weingarten and Michigan State University education policy professor Joshua Cowen. Together, they dissect the real impact of school vouchers on public education, students, and the very essence of our democracy. Join us as we explore why school vouchers, often touted as a solution for educational improvement, might not be the silver bullet their proponents claim they are. From diverting funding away from public schools to perpetuating discrimination, the implications are vast. If you like what you hear in this episode, you can listen to the entire conversation by going to aft.org/uniontalk and search Are School Vouchers Good for Education, which is the episode this conversation is from. So, without further ado, let's dive into this dialogue.
So let's kind of get into a couple of these studies.
Yeah.
And I think that there's and you have said this to me a bunch, but you are really clear because you've looked at all of this about the three big areas where voucher programs have to date failed.
Yeah.
Number one, they divert funds from public schools. Number two, they have this history of corruption and waste. Number three, they use public dollars to encourage discrimination. And now number four, when you actually look at the data, the kids who are using a voucher to go to these other schools are actually doing worse in these in the situations they're going to, the privatized situations they're going to, than their counterparts in public schools. Did I get the big four right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, I will say the only the thing that worries me about the kind of fraud piece moving forward is that we're not going to know, because the current bills proposed almost without exception across the country today really strip away any ability for taxpayers to kind of gauge not only outcomes, but just even how the money's being spent. Right. So in at least 10, 15 years ago, in the when I kind of came up through the program evaluation world, states, including voucher advocates, really wanted to know how these programs were doing while they were spending their money, because they were convinced that kids were going to do better academically, and they wanted to brag about it. And they were convinced that voucher schools were going to be able to go further with the dollar than public schools. And so they wanted as much daylight as possible 10, 15 years ago. That's how we know all these bad things today. And it's because we know all these bad things today that they are doing the exact opposite today. So I want to make clear that everything we know about voucher programs, we're not going to know in the next several years if voucher advocates have their way, precisely by design, which is an important thing.
So what I hear you saying is that whether you're a proponent of vouchers or whether you're against vouchers, basically anyone should want transparency and accountability to see how the public dollar gets used. And that should be something, for those listeners who are listening to this, that should be something that anyone should be pushing onto a state legislature or to the House Republicans.
I mean, my basic rule, we can debate about sort of the requirements that public schools have to face with respect to testing and financial disclosure and all that. There's good conversations to be had about that. But what to me at a bare minimum, and really further, but at a bare minimum, private schools taking taxpayer funds through a voucher system should have to disclose the same information public schools do, and the same information academic progress reports. Then that means, as long as we have standardized testing, and again, we can talk about whether that's a good or a bad thing, but as long as we do, private schools that are being propped up on the taxpayer dime should have to take those tests too, is my view.
Yeah. And
that is something that people agreed with 10 years ago until we saw the devastating academic impacts, and now they want nothing to do with that.
Nothing to do with it.
They want to keep the public schools testing, but they don't want to keep the private schools testing.
Right. Well, I think that's a really important piece that, those people who are listening to this and are thinking about how they should size up these new bills should push to have as part of these bills, if these bills are going to actually pass. But it raises another question, Josh, about the issue about discrimination.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of this arena, in terms of what you're seeing?
Well, it's something of a homecoming for voucher programs. So a lot of folks know that this economist named Milton Friedman, a white dude like me, came up with this plan. He's sort of considered the godfather of school voucher programs, privatization and education in general too. And I think this is fairly common knowledge. There's lots of things named after Milton Friedman. He has a Nobel Prize. He's considered sort of the patron saint of these folks. What a lot of people don't talk enough about is the fact that Friedman's framework for what became vouchers today. He first wrote this very smart-sounding academic paper that he got all these prizes for later in 1955. And something else was happening in 1955, and that was the year after Brown versus Board of Education and the Supreme Court started to order racial integration. Voucher programs have their historical sort of roots in this intellectual framework for discrimination. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Friedman's framework created sort of this pathway to provide parents who did not want their children going to school with children of color at that time to find alternatives on the taxpayer dime. Fast forwarding to today, a lot of voucher programs historically that have been tried are rooted in urban environments. And so it sort of in application, we haven't had necessarily the same overt form of racial discrimination that vouchers have their roots in, but we have different kinds of discrimination in this way today. First and foremost, and the thing that's been really publicly reported on, and this is what's related to the culture war piece today, is voucher schools have been quite transparent in their discrimination against LGBTQ kids, and not just LGBTQ identifying children, but any child, regardless of how they identify, who has LGBTQ parents. We have a number of reports out of Florida and out of Indiana. Millions of dollars in taxpayer funding are going to these schools. Now, I think it's wrong. I think it's using the tax code, using public policy to bully and discriminate against kids. But stepping back for just a second, the framework for vouchers allows that in today's current legislation allows this to happen. It doesn't just these schools are not doing this secretly. We've had to have some reporters kind of dig this up because it's hard information to get, but these schools are making no secret about this whatsoever, because in each of the new pieces of legislation that have been pushing vouchers forward, and again, this is very different than they were 20 years ago, the legislation explicitly allows schools to keep what the word in language is creed or values. There's lines in each piece of legislation that says nothing in this legislation will prohibit the school from acting on its own creed or values. And so then hiding behind that kind of creed-based or often religious is what they call it, although I don't know, there are plenty of religions that don't discriminate against children. But this is how schools get around this, is they say it's part of our values to discriminate against these children, and the statute allows us to do it. And so, to me at this point, it's legal, it's protected discrimination. And that's, again, this isn't any secret. Like, nobody's as active as I've been in sort of developing a public voice on this issue. There have been certain things that no one ever tries to dispute with me. One is the devastating catastrophic academics. The data are too clear on that. And the other is that these schools discriminate. Also, the data are too clear on that. The only question is, what do we do about this at this point?
Thanks for listening to this Union Talk recap episode. To listen to the full episode, head to aft.org/Union Talk.